So welcome to this video on focus groups. In this video we're going to look at what a focus group is, how you conduct them, the different types of focus groups, and then finally we're going to conclude thinking about their strengths and their weaknesses as a data collection method. So this quote kind of captures what a focus group is. It's essentially an interview with a small group of people on a specific topic. So whilst the interview analogy is useful in one way, in another way it's not, because we have a really interesting, rich complexity to a focus group. It allows us to look at the interactions that occur between different people, the different opinions that might emerge, and how people will build on one person's idea, somebody else will bring in their own idea and either agree or build out an idea. So it's a rich way of collecting data. With a focus group, you're intentionally bringing together this small group. Typically, you're going to aim for somewhere between 4 to 12 participants. And you're going to be working perhaps less as an interviewer and more as a facilitator. You're going to be leading and guiding a discussion. The intention here for you as the researcher is to foster an environment in which the group dynamic itself generates the data. The idea is that it's not simply a collection of individual interviews happening simultaneously, but rather that there's a shared dialogue, that we're capturing agreements and disagreements, and we're also capturing the way that those agreements and disagreements emerge from the group itself. Given how related focus groups are to interviews, you might wonder why use one over the other. So focus groups are best suited for research questions where we're attempting to explore group norms or shared experiences. It's particularly powerful for understanding the diversity of perspectives within a particular community or group. So we might explore how value emerges, or the ability to produce insights which might be inaccessible from other formats. So if you're interested in how ideas are collectively formed, how meaning is socially negotiated, or how peer groups discuss a particular topic, then a focus group would be an excellent choice for a research method. Focus groups, you might imagine, require careful planning. So the first step is to define and clarify what it is that you're hoping to investigate. And as with all of these other things, you're going to start off with your research question and thinking about what are the ideas that you need to investigate to answer that question. You've got to really maintain that sharp focus. So much of the preparation will be like it is for an interview. So you're going to kind of create a discussion guide. But this probably needs to be more flexible than it would be for an interview. Often it's going to contain a series of open-ended questions, but it's also wise sometimes to plan prompts for activities that can kind of stimulate discussion. So for instance, you might share a short video or perhaps a clip of music. It might be that you've got some photos that you'll share with the group to kind of trigger responses. You want to have careful consideration of the flow and the timing. So it's essential, because you're dealing with a group dynamic, to think about how much time you need and where particular topics need to fall in that time frame. So if you know you've got 4 topics to discuss and you've got, let's say, 45 minutes, you know that you're going to have about 10 minutes per topic. But you need to plan for that and think about how you use that time effectively. Selecting participants is going to be one of the most critical stages. So we have a number of challenges here. You need to think about who might be appropriate participants to take part, but you also need to think carefully about that group composition. So are you looking for people who are going to share the same opinion? So it might be that you've done a survey and then you're going to bring people together in a focus group. So are you going to bring people who've answered those questions in the same way? Or perhaps you're deliberately going to put people together so they work in groups and kind of battle out different ideas. So think about how you set your group up. You're going to want to think about existing power dynamics. Very often you might use a forum or a focus group when you're interviewing people from the same organization. But clearly that comes with risks. Let's say you're working in a music service and you decide to get together staff. You might have instrumental teachers, but you might also have their line managers in that same focus group. And you need to think about what's going to be the implication of having that hierarchical difference. Who gets to have a voice? How free will people feel about actually answering your questions honestly? Having managed to get your group together and plan who's going to be there, you need to think about the challenges of actually leading and facilitating the discussion. And as we keep on saying, it's more than simply interviewing. You're very often going to find yourself being a moderator, and it's a really crucial distinction. You're not simply asking questions. At times, what you might be doing is probing and balancing contributions. So thinking about that and how you facilitate, one of the real key challenges is either people who take over the conversation. So you might have one or two people who are most outspoken. How do you manage those people without telling them to be quiet and keeping them back? What you don't want to do is inhibit everybody, but how do you give voice to those people who are quietest? How do you make sure that we get balance of opinion? How do you make sure that there's not a dominant idea that comes forward that prevents people with contrary opinions feeling like they can actually put them forward? You also need to manage where the conversation sort of starts to stray too far. It's very easy for the group dynamic to start to work in a way that you start off with your question or your topic, and then the conversation deviates so much it's tricky for you to bring it back on track. So that's why this is kind of a process of facilitation. You need to keep a careful record of the discussion. A bit like interviews, this might be note-taking, but more often now this is going to be either capturing audio or capturing video. If you're capturing audio, one of the challenges you're going to have is kind of tracking who's speaking at any one time. With a video, that might be easier to do, but even that comes with complications, considerations. How do people feel speaking in front of a camera? And also making sure that, depending upon how you set up the focus group, are you able to get everybody into your camera view? So think about those types of things. As with interviews, there are different ways of conducting them. Two key ways are structured and semi-structured. So as you might imagine, structured, you're going to have a rigid set of predetermined questions and talking points. And those, particularly if you're undertaking a focus group with multiple groups, might well be the same. So they're going to be identical each time you visit a different group. However, in most contexts, you're likely to use a semi-structured. So again, you're likely to have some key questions, perhaps some key topics, but you're going to allow the conversation to weave, duck and dive a little bit. And it might be that you're going to follow up with questions that you hadn't planned before the event as the conversation leads to interesting new areas. It's also possible to have completely unstructured focus groups. This might be particularly useful if you don't know much about the topic. So it might be that your starting point for your work is to go in and really start a debate, a conversation to find out the key elements that you're going to want to investigate further with other research methods. So that might be how you engage with an unstructured focus group and why you would use one. It's worth saying that whilst we've been talking a lot about face-to-face interactions, increasingly now people are delivering focus groups online, so you can use a tool like Zoom. That can be really useful because you're overcoming geographical barriers. It is also a really interesting thing. You could ask everybody to have their cameras off and to anonymize their names, and that might be quite powerful because it gives people to speak in a more free and open way at times. And obviously with the tools that are built into things like Zoom, you're able to record and capture that very easily. Choosing your approach, you're going to want to think about your research question. You're going to want to think about what's the purpose of the focus group, what you're hoping to achieve with it. As we've discussed, it might be that you're engaged in exploratory focus, more loosely open-ended, where you're allowing people to talk so you can find out all of the really key things you're after. You might be leading a confirmatory focus group, so you've already identified what the key areas are that you're wanting to investigate, and you're wanting to get direct feedback on those points and confirm how those are relevant to people, how those phenomena emerge. So as ever, consider your research question, consider the phase of research you're in, consider the actual role, why are you choosing to do a focus group, and all of these things are going to help you plan effectively and choose your approach. As we've highlighted, there are some obvious pitfalls here. The one about a dominant voice, one or two people in a group, really controlling that group dynamic, that's a key issue. Very often we have issues in social situations where people want to give the right answer, so we need to be aware of that. Also, as a moderator, how are we leading? Are we leading the conversation in a particular direction in terms of the meanings and the values and the things that people say? And that can be through our words, but equally it can be through our body language. You know, are we closed? Are we open at particular times? Are we smiling? Are we looking frowning and giving negative feedback when people are saying other things? You need to think about the logistical challenges, scheduling, attendance, how you manage group conflicts. That can be a real challenge of organising a focus group, although online focus groups overcome some of that. You're going to have confidentiality concerns here, so the ethics of this are a bit more problematic. Clearly, you're likely to want to write up in an anonymised way, and you'll stress that when people give their permission for taking part, so one part of the ethical process. But in a focus group, particularly where people are gathered in a room, whilst you can anonymise in your write-up, you're going to be aware that other people in that space know what each other have said. And particularly if this is in a workplace, perhaps you're in a school and you're getting a group of teachers together, if person A says something that's out of line or controversial, then it's possible for other members of the staff to recognise they just said that thing and to repeat that afterwards outside of a focus group. The other issue is one of overgeneralization. So we've got to be really careful about about how generalizable this data is, which perhaps isn't a problem if we think about particularly rich data in a qualitative situation, but it could be more problematic if you're thinking about this in terms of quantitative data. Strengths, there's some really amazing strengths here. The issue of group dynamics is really key. If we're interested in how ideas form and develop and the social interactions that form ideas, this is a real strength of focus groups. So it's important that way. Another thing is just that interaction. It's a bit like a socio-constructivist learning, in that one person can trigger an idea that somebody else jumps on, and perhaps that other person wouldn't have thought of that idea themselves, but when it's said by somebody else, they realise its relevance, and they're then in a position to really illuminate it. So that's a real strength of this type of approach. So there's some good reasons for using a focus group. As with all of these methods, there's a lot to think about with them. This is like a broad guide. Hopefully I've covered most of the main points, but if you're thinking of using a focus group, definitely go away. Again, most of the key texts are going to talk about focus groups in some detail. So go look at the books, think about the key elements that you need to think about when you're positioning how you're going to actually undertake this approach. I shall see you in the next video.